There we go. So welcome. Thank you for being here as part of this Yoga Changemaker series, and particularly for exploring pleasure, embodiment, activism, and all of these things that sometimes seem to not go together, but actually are very intimately connected. I wanted, yeah.
Is it Susanna? Susanna?
Yes, I say Susanna.
Susanna. Okay,
Yeah.
good.
And how do
Beautiful.
you pronounce your name?
Adrienne.
Adrienne.
Adrienne. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I'll accept a French pronunciation if people have French in their systems. And I'll accept almost any pronunciation if it's like that's the nature of the tongue. But yeah, I say Adrienne.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. You've been doing work in these worlds of embodiment and activism for a while. And I actually wanted to begin by going back before there was books or, even like ruckus and actions, but to where you might see the threads of the things that you embody, embodiment, pleasure, activism, these threads in your childhood.
Hmm. I love that. One of the people I honor in pleasure activism and like one of the, I think, earliest threads of it was my father's mother, my grandmother Brown. She died young, relatively young. She died at 54, and she had 7 children, um, with several different fathers to those children. And she was someone who was really rooted in joy and laughter and generosity. And my memories of going to visit her, um, like there's snapshots, right? Because it was like I was 9, I think, when she passed.
Mm.
Um, but there's snapshots of extravagant Sunday hats and snapshots of popsicles in a freezer that every kid in the neighborhood knew that they could come get.
Mm.
Like, no matter how much she might have been struggling financially, like she just always had that offer available to the community. And I know that there was some moment in my life when I was like, oh, like having a lot of different fathers of your children can be some point of judgment. But in her, I saw it as a point of like freedom and not giving up on love and not giving up on connection and not giving up on this thing that she was really gifted at, which was mothering.
Mm.
Um, but so she stands out as my as an ancestor in the lineage of that pleasure activism for me.
Mm.
And I was a military kid. My dad was in the military for the 30 years of like my growing up life. And so you had to learn really early about adaptation in the body. And like every 2 years, it was like I'm landing in a totally new environment. And for my survival, I have to figure out how to be likable and how to understand how everything works here. And inside that, I also have to stay in touch with like who my sense of self is.
Mm.
And I had a really coherent sense of self as a kid. Like I was creative, I was a writer, I was a smart kid. Like I was like, I am me. How do I be here? And family was a big part of that. Like just really being in relationship to like, okay, no matter where I am, I've got this unit that loves me and that knows me as I am. And I talk about that as probably the greatest privilege of my life
Mm.
is having this. It's not necessarily the structure of the family, but the practice of family that I was born into
Mm.
was one of continuously returning to belonging, continuously returning to um, trying to figure out what right relationship was, before we had any language for this. And even now, it's like we just keep doing that practice. Like now we have a weekly meeting, a
Wow.
weekly family phone call that started during the pandemic, the early days of the pandemic, because I know we're still in it. But
Yeah.
when it was like we're all quarantined and no one can go anywhere, we started talking once a week and really being like, how are you? And
Mm.
eventually that question always leads to like, who are you? Who are
Mm.
you right now? Like, what matters to you? Um, And I'm like, oh yeah, my family was doing that around a dinner table like my whole life. And
Mm.
I think that that also, there's a real sense of like, mm, pleasure of food together, pleasure of travel together. We did a
Mm,
lot of trips. Like my parents like made a way out of no way. You know, it's like we didn't
mm,
have resources. You know, the military budget is not, you know, the what the kid, you know, what you get as a family is not a lot. And my dad was spreading it amongst his brothers and sisters as well as us.
mm,
Um, but it was still like, okay, well, we could take an all-night bus and spend the day in Paris and take an
mm,
all-night bus back, you know,
mm,
and those things really matter. Like a lot of our familial memories are of these
mm.
trips to see things and to be together tasting crepes and you know, so yeah, I feel like the foundation was well laid for what came later.
Mm. Thank you so much for sharing. And as you were speaking, I was kind of having my own reflections, and I invite folks listening to think about your own reflections on those memories, right? They're very tactile, they're very sensory. And the other piece that I was feeling a kinship with is that like moving, because for myself I'm a multicultural kid, right? Like I was from England, born in England, Indian, moved to the US. And so I think for many of us who are immigrants, but also anyone who is experiences oppression and experiences that not at homeness, which can
Yes.
happen anywhere, even in the town, city, country where we're born,
Yeah.
if we're under that foot of an oppressive system. Those small joys and ways that I see, like often it's a certain person in the family or a key community member who creates belonging with popsicles, with stories, with
Yeah,
a sense of play or adventure or art or music, whatever it is. Those are moments that really do shape us.
I think it's so important to me as I get older to highlight those because I think especially as I came into like trying to change the world, I
Mm,
became so focused on like the largest scale of things, right? And I was like, how do we do things at the largest scale? And I'm like, we do that by focusing on these small scale generosities and these small scale relationships or deep scale, right? Because it's not really small. It's like something that's happening at a deeper level, but it's not maybe as wide. And I don't know, I'm paying more and more attention to it because I'm like, oh, I think there's a way that looking up and out of our lives and like at this broad vision is both really compelling and it's like necessary to have that. We
mm,
need to not have it at the expense of forming the relationships that are right around us
mm,
and committing to them and deepening into them.
mm.
You know, um, so yeah, I think after a long period of that widening for myself, I've noticed myself coming back into like, what can the people right around me count on me for?
Mm.
And like, what is my variation on the popsicles? You
Yeah.
know, what is my variation on the adventurous trips? Like now I'm an auntie, and I'm like, the kids that I'm an auntie to, many of them haven't traveled out of the country. And it might not be as easy to do so because of the conditions and the time that we're living in and all this. And they're not in the military. They're not, you know, so I'm like, oh, how do I still imbue your childhood with adventure and a sense of a wide world being available to you and a sense of you being connected? You know, that's one of the things I felt as a kid, that my parents fell in love in the deep South in the 70s, and they were an interracial couple, and they are still together. They actually just moved back to the South for the first time since they left right before I was born. And, you know, I've really been just tuning into this. What was their life like? There was something that had been planted as a seed in both of them, even though they had not traveled, that they were like, we can love each other, even though everyone
Mm.
says we can't, and we got to get out of here.
Yeah.
Like, we got to get out of here. If we're going to raise our kids, we got to go places where acceptance might be possible. And
Mm.
of course, they never found that exactly. But, um, and of course, the world didn't change while they were away. You know, I think they were like, oh, by the time we come back
Mm.
to the US, like things will have advanced and, you know, things move in cycles. And
Mm.
so for me, I'm like, okay, how do I help the children I love be with the world as it is
Mm.
and still have a sense of like, and there's wonder and there's beauty and there's things that are ancient that are like really cool, and there's things that are new that you're going to co-create that are really cool.
Mm.
And basically that being alive is like a good thing, because
Yeah.
I think this is kind of a challenging time to stay connected to that. And yet, as much suffering and as much struggle as we are steeped in right now, there's also an immense amount changing, and
Mm.
there's an immense amount of beauty and good and humor and creativity happening concurrently. And yes, I think it's like, I think about that. I'm like, how do I be a force of bringing attention to those good things and to those delicious aspects of being alive in this moment?
Mm. I love that so much. And yeah, it's just, and the answer changes. I'm thinking about when I taught high school and I taught English as a second language, I had students from all over the world. And there was a lot of tension in that classroom. And there's a lot of frustration, understandable frustration, because these students were being treated like they weren't smart by all their other teachers when they just didn't speak English as fluently as if they'd been born here, but they were brilliant. And I remember it was such a simple thing, but one thing that we started to do was like, besides looking at the American dream and the American nightmare, which was helpful to give them tools for navigating the system. Yeah. Was like culture days on Fridays. And so we'd all bring in foods from our different cultures and share, and then like put up a map and talk about where we were from. And it was so healing for me too. It was like what I had needed as a kid that I didn't get. As an immigrant and as a brown kid and a mixed kid, my parents met in the 70s. I guess it was the 70s, and are still together, which I also want to like underscore. It is hard for
That's
mixed
hard.
families,
Like,
especially of that generation. Yeah, to or earlier generations. I think there's a lot of forces at play, kind of bringing us apart. But I feel like it's like, what is the right action for me at this time is the question I come back to. And in the yoga teacher trainings that I run, we read emergent strategy, particularly in the 300 hour, which is like the more advanced, advanced, right? Quote unquote. It's like where you're ready to do kind of a deeper dive, and we do a yoga and social change project.
beautiful.
It is. And it's also so fascinating because folks pick big things. And then often it's very overwhelming and it's very challenging to accomplish, some major social change in the 6 months that we're in the training. And so we often come back to like, what can I do right here? And it might be like, talk to my students at the end of class. Like, it's really interesting to see how that can expand and contract.
Well, it's also, one of the things I love about the practice of yoga is from within the practice, you can feel the impact of small shifts of your attention and small shifts of the breath, and how that can unlock a whole new capacity in your body, and the impact of practice, right? That it's like, you might not be able to do this, but if you return every day and attempt it, you strengthen the capacity in yourself to do it. And fundamentally, that's so much of what social justice is an invitation into, is like, we have to breathe differently inside this human body, this collective human body. We have to bring our breath to where it hurts. We have to bring our attention to where there's a misalignment. And then we have to practice reshaping ourselves. We have to practice, that I always think of that move of like taking the breath in and exhaling and going just a little further, right? And it's like, as you release what's in there, you actually make room for a new extension. And I'm like, all of that to me, that's really what we're up to. It's like, there's a depth of attention. And I think so often when people are like, I'm going to change this, especially if you're like, in 6 months, I'm going to change capitalism, it's like, great. This doesn't mean you can't do it, but you can't do it if you stay at the surface of it, right? if you're like, I'm just going to stay this, or I'm going to perform yoga, right? I'm
Mm.
going to perform social change. You can't do much in 6 months. If you spend 6 months working on your sun salutation, if you spend 6 months working on how you handle yourself in conflict, you can actually make a huge shift, right? That can then ripple out into much larger shifts. So I'm always in that dance, like it's like small is all,
Mm.
but the goals that we have are not small goals. We have the largest possible goals, but we have an understanding that the large is made up of all these small parts, including
Mm.
ourselves. And I love that. For me, that always feels like such a liberating thing to realize. And I'm like, I'm not
Mm.
making this up. This is how the world is. It's atomic. We live in an atomic
Mm.
world where everything large is made up of these small things, and very small things can have a huge impact. And
Mm.
yeah, I think that's good news.
Yes, it really
It's
is.
good news. I mean, it's good news. It's hard when it's working against us, but it's good news because it means even when we feel like we're down and on our back foot, um, it's possible to hone in and create those shifts that allow us to create more possibilities.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
so many boons, and I don't know. I'm actually really curious about your experience with yoga and where you're at with yoga right now in your life. But there's so many like benefits actually that are written about that come from that deep practice of yoga. Like just even, for example, satya, which is truthfulness. The more we practice with truth, and I think of truth, not just as like speaking, but radical listening and deep listening, the more people will listen to
Yeah.
our words and the more people will open up to us, and so some of them are very kind of almost like, oh, that's common sense, but they're really powerful as we start to experience them. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit about your practice with yoga and if you've always felt connected to it, where you have, where you haven't, where you're at now.
Beautiful. I think that I'm trying to remember, like, when did I first ever really actually do yoga?
Mhm.
I think I was introduced to yoga initially as in a like going to yoga classes when I was living in New York and being a
Okay.
little like, wow, like there's something to this,
Mhm.
but how much is trendy? Like I'm trying to understand it. And it was very much at that point disconnected from being a part of a whole framework of life, being a part of a
Mhm.
whole way of looking at the world. It was just like, do this exercise and it will straighten your back. And I found hot yoga. I
Mhm.
found myself really being like, this unlocked something in me.
Mhm.
But it wasn't until my first sabbatical, which was in 2012,
Mhm.
I went to this retreat center called Kalani, where you could do a work trade sabbatical stay. So every week I would work in the fields and I had a machete and I would like be cutting down weeds and stuff like that. And it was really cool work. And in exchange for doing that work each morning, you could take unlimited yoga classes and you had room and board. And
Was this in
um,
Hawaii?
in Hawaii, on Big Island in Hawaii.
Yes, they were one of the first places. Well, I had to push them to invite me in as
Oh,
a
wow.
color. Yeah, and so I wonder if one of the teachers you had was Kimberly Dark, who is a wonderful, like, big-bodied yoga for all bodies yoga
I
teacher.
don't think she was there yet, but I did have this teacher, and I'm trying to remember her name because she was 72 and she taught this class on Sunday mornings that was a restorative yoga class that was 2 hours long. And I had done a lot of yoga, at that point I was like, I know there's something to this for me.
Mhm.
But she did a class that was like, first of all, where I felt literally restored. I was like, I would come
Mhm.
out of it just like, holy wow, like I didn't know my body could
Mhm.
feel like this. And then she would say at the beginning of class, I am 72. I started really doing yoga when I was 38, and it transformed my life.
Mhm.
And don't get caught in a cycle of reliance on a yoga class.
Mhm.
Find yoga practices that you can do in your home, wherever you are, make it a part of your daily life.
Mhm.
And that's really been, it really stuck with me that it was like, she's like, yeah, if you rely on a class or you rely on a particular teacher, it's great to go and learn and to have people who can do these corrections. But fundamentally, you want to trust your own body and you want to be doing yoga all the time, and you want to think, you never want to be outside of yoga. And I found that to be really helpful. And so for years now, I do sun salutations each day, and I add, like depending on what my body needs, I basically will spend 20 to 30 minutes in yoga practice each day. And then this year, for the first time, I went and had an Ayurvedic retreat, the Panchakarma, and did like this whole deep cleanse, and was like, oh, the breath part of this work actually really matters. And like, what does it look like to practice quantum breathing? I got to practice yoga nidra, and I'm like, oh, I really need to calm and affirm myself in this particular way. I need to cleanse my body and like trust that my body can release what it needs to let go of. Like there was just all these pieces. I was like, oh, like, yeah, it's a whole system. And I think now I feel like I'm taking it all into a deeper place where I'm like, the choices I make about what food goes in my system are a part of my yoga practice. How I hydrate is part of my yoga practice. How I wake up and take care of my mouth is part of my yoga practice. Like how I sleep and how I interact with technology around my sleep is part of my yoga practice. If people are, it feels like crossing my boundaries, how I react to that is part of my yoga practice. How I manage myself online feels like part of my yoga practice, right? And I'm friends with Jessamine Stanley, who is the, ultimate goddess, but her book Yoke was really helpful for this too, because it was really just like understanding what it means to really commit fully to yoga as a lifestyle. And I've also had, I'll say there's been shadow sides. There's been periods where I was like I had one year where I was like, okay, every day of this month, I'm going to add one more sun salutation rep and and I like pushed myself so hard. I was really hurting my wrist. I was really hurting my knees and ankles. I was like, I'm an extreme sun salutator, sun salute or whatever it was. And I've had moments where I would feel extreme doubt, like, can my body do all the things that all these other people's bodies can do? And like, should I feel bad if I never get an inversion in my system or something like that? And that's why Jessamine has been a really helpful teacher for me, because her framework is always everyday yoga, every body yoga, and disconnecting the idea that the shape of my body is an indicator of what my body will be able to do with practice. So I'm like, oh, I can do so much more than society led me to believe I could do. And it's because every body can carry itself, right? I'm like, my body is designed to carry itself. And sometimes it might be carried in a wheelchair. Sometimes it might be carrying with a walking stick. But this is my skeleton. These are my bones. This is my body. And this is how I'm carrying this soul through this lifetime. And yoga just keeps me in touch with that. And I'm like, this is a precious vessel carrying precious cargo through a precious life. So,
yeah. I'm really just feeling that, because we've so misunderstood what yoga is in the West, connecting it to physical attainment and acrobatics, and because it truly is a liberation practice. And so really whatever helps one feel more free, is the way to practice.
Sorry, I'm like recovering from this cold, so I'm just like, okay.
Yeah, please.
My nose is like, girl, you need
Take
to.
care. Yeah. I actually remember seeing, I think you posted a while ago, maybe a year or two. It was like a year after the pandemic, but we all thought we were coming back, but we were going to be out of it, but we were still, now years into it. And you had said, we're all a little softer, a little rounder. And I remember feeling like you're sharing, and this is the power of social media, like the edges of it all, but feeling a kind of like, yeah, we are, and there's a joy in that and a permission in that. And yet I think that for me, I experience, especially, I'm 46, my body is changing, it's rounder, it's, all the things. I recently broke my wrist, it's like, saying yoga is for everybody and saying everybody deserves to practice is one thing, but really practicing it, really giving ourselves permission. I'm curious if you could share a little bit about that, your journey with that, with yoga, or just in general with pleasure and inhabiting, your body as it is.
Well, now I think of yoga as one of my pleasure practices. So it's all connected, right? But if I wake up and I don't do my sun salutation and I don't open my hips and I don't really feel for my back and feel for the alignment that's possible in my body, and I don't really ground myself and extend, I can really feel that my body has less capacity for pleasure in that day, because things are tight and out of alignment. I'm much more likely to injure myself just living, right? So a lot of it for me is, especially as I have lost different ability, right? So when I was in my 20s, I was like someone who went every weekend dancing for hours on Friday, hours on Saturday. Like that was my church. That was my heaven. That was everything I needed, was like, get me on a dance floor in the club with strangers pouring sweat. And I'm like, this is it. And I think when I was young, I felt like yoga was like, that's why I was like, I need hot yoga. I need something more extreme, right? And then as I've gotten older, I have early onset arthritis. I have a thyroid condition, and everything in my body moves towards inflammation. And a lot of what I've been doing is learning to be with my body and say, okay, inflammation is a reaction to this world, not just partially what I eat. It's also, I think, a reaction to all the toxins that just are now default in what we eat, what we drink, what we breathe, what we take in, what we hear, what we have to navigate, how we have to survive. It's like, it's an inflammatory world. And so for me, yoga is one of the practices I use to like tune in to that. It helps you to just be present. I'm like, oh, my body is actually communicating to me all the time. And I learned that in a yoga class. I learned that on yoga mats. That I was like, oh, if I try to do this triangle pose and I clench up and I have a cramp over here in my side, what is my body telling me? Is it telling me I can't do this? Is it telling me to adjust myself? Is it telling me come up a little bit? I worked with do you know the Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams? Yeah. So she does this offering with yoga where she's like, try the 30% of this pose, now try 50% of this pose, now try 70% of this pose, 80. And she's like, whichever percent you can do is the right one for your body. And it was like a revelation to me to have that experience and to be like, oh, I'm always going for 100%. And that's how I live my whole life. Is I'm always like, what is the teacher doing? They're upside down with their crow pose. Okay, I got to go for that. And instead being like, my version of that is this. And that's what my body is doing. And this is my body's 100% of this pose, right? Anyway, there were just things like that that were like, this is helpful for my whole life, is how do I stop pushing my body to not, sometimes 100, sometimes 150%. How do I stop overriding and start tuning in? So I think that's one big piece. And then literal pleasure increases, right? Where I'm like, in order to still have a really wonderful, active sex life, an active life of pleasure, an active life of being able to play and dance and have all that, I have to listen to my body. I'd have to be in touch with it. And so yoga is a way that I'm able to drop in and be like, okay, what can we do today? Where are we tight today? Where are we open today? Where can we I've definitely had moments, I'm sure everyone has, where I'm like engaged in acts of sex or something. And like my hip is like, hold up, girl. And I'm like, okay, hold on. I need to bring some breath to the hip right now so that we can stay in this moment. Or we need to request an adjustment that, will allow us to continue having pleasure with each other. And I love that, and actually I find it really helpful to be with other people who also practice yoga, who are also in touch with their bodies in that way. We also come from practices that are about really listening for the body's wisdom and edges and knowledge, rather than overriding
Mm.
and trying to push the body beyond, you know.
Mm.
Uh, and I know all things happen in all places. I know there's people who do yoga that way too, who are like, yeah, I'm pushing, but I'm like, the majority of teachers I've had have been like, this practice is actually a mindfulness practice. Like fundamentally all of yoga, I remember someone telling me that like everything related to yoga was about meditation, was about mindfulness, was about presence. And I'm like, that's what I'm trying to do, is increase my ability to be present with pleasure in my life,
Mm.
right? Increase my ability to be present with power also. And I'm
Mm.
like, oh, I have agency. I have some power in this moment to decide how I'm going to be in my body.
Mm.
That's the sovereignty that I want to protect.
Mm.
Right now we're in all these struggles for the right to make decisions over our bodies.
Mm.
And I've really been reflecting on this because coming through the pandemic, I had I was like, yes, we should have the right to do whatever we want with our bodies, abortions, trans people
Mm.
should have the right, etc. But then we came to the vaccinations. I was like, accept that.
Mm.
Accept that. And I had this, I'm like, I'm not right. I'm terrified.
Mm.
I don't know how to allow people to have that right. Like it was really, I was so terrified. I was struggling with it. And
Yeah.
I feel like yoga also helped me there to be like, actually, that's a place of sovereignty as well. I may not agree with the process or the decision making,
Mm.
but a functional system would make room for this decision.
Mm.
A functional system would be like, yeah, this is a choice. Everything we do with our bodies is our choice. That's what body sovereignty is. And yeah, I don't know. To me, I really like a practice. I like anything that's like, you're not doing it right the first time and you're not doing right all the time.
Mm.
Constantly can grow and you can constantly deepen and you can constantly find new possibilities inside of the practice. And
Mm.
I think that's also how you lead the most pleasurable life,
Yeah.
right? 'Cause it's like, oh, even if this day is a crapshoot, it's
Mm.
just this day that's a crapshoot. And in it, can I find the humor of this crapshoot?
Mm.
Right? Can I place an intention for how I want to have the next day be a little better?
Mm.
Right? How can I return to the agency I have in this life?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so helpful, those reminders, it's really like, yeah, just returning to that agency. And I wonder about something I've wondered about actually for a while is this contradiction between being an activist
Yeah.
and being a successful activist, right?
Uh-huh.
Because, in the world that I'm in, it's really so much of what you're saying is resonating. It's like, we're practicing yoga for personal empowerment, also for creating social change. But sometimes when folks are successful at that, or, rise up or become somehow known or whatever, yeah, take a position of leadership, there's immediate or very swift critique of that person. And so there is this sort of contradiction that I think I'm hearing a lot from my students, causes them to not speak up, to not take action, to not take leadership, even though they have that passion or they have that inspiration within them. And
Yeah.
I'm curious how the reception to your work has been, at least in the world I'm in, very loving and very supportive. And I know that can't be all that's out there, right? Like there has to be a
There's
contradiction.
somebody mad at me every single day.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Same.
There's people mad at me every single day. Right now, there's a set of people who are very upset because I'm doing a writing retreat in Ireland, and there's an economic crisis happening there. And we're doing the writing retreat as a way for people to invest in the local economy.
Yeah.
But the way people are viewing it is like, now the cost is prohibitive and we can't afford to go, and that's not accessible.
Right.
And like, yeah, it's not, the only way to make it accessible would be to pursue foundation funding, which
Yeah.
we did, the last time. But it's this whole thing where I'm like, oh, I understand that folks like, we want to access this, and right. And I'm like, but some of the energy and the way that people are expressing it is what feels very sharp to me, or feels very like, I'm like, like, why are you talking to me? I wouldn't let anyone ever talk to me like this in person. Like, you're not asking any questions. You don't actually know what's going on. But what I find is the celebritization or the success, like even I would pull apart the success from
Mm.
the visibility, right? Because I think
Mm.
people are like, visibility means you're succeeding. And I'm like, no, visibility just means people are looking at you. They could be looking at you because you're a hot mess. They could be looking at you because you're high drama. They could be looking at you because you're very performative and loud. They could be looking at you because you look good. Like, people could be looking for any number of reasons. Those reasons are not actually tied to you have impact on the issues that you are trying to move in the world.
Mm.
I come from an organizer background that's like, you want to have material improvement around the issues that you're working on in the world, and
Mm.
material improvement for the people that you love and care about, that
Mm.
they can feel that what you're saying, what you're doing, the effort that you're putting into the work is actually changing their material conditions, right?
Mm.
And for me, I'm like, okay, I work from a place of questions and hypotheses, like emergent strategy, pleasure activism. All of these are like, what would it look like if justice and liberation were the most pleasurable experiences we would have? How could we get in right relationship with change? And then everything that emerges from that are the experiments that maybe answer that question. So
Mm.
it's a precarious way to walk in the world, because I'm not positing, do this, instant success is going to happen. I'm like, try this.
Mm.
Know that what we've been doing is not working. None of us are free. Racial capitalism still exists. We're not living in a just world. So let's try something different than what we've been doing over and over again and see. And I'm blown away by what I get back from people when they're like, we are trying it and
Mm.
we're learning. And a lot of this is really working. And a lot of this is really shifting our relationships, and it's shifting what's possible. That's what I pay most attention to.
Mm.
And then the public, the sort of more general, like who's paying attention, who's, how many people are following you, whatever, you know, I try to hold the responsibility of, okay, there are people paying attention to me. I want to make sure I'm being as responsible as I can with what they see, or who they get pointed to, or what they get pointed to. And I recognize that it's a fickle space, right? It's like, we love you one day, we hate you the next day, we love you the next day, we hate you the next day. And I don't think we're meant to live at that level of visibility.
Mm.
I don't think we can have authentic connections to that many people, like in that way. Like, I'm like, I am trying to live an authentic life and to be in good relationship with people. But I'm like, I really work to be accountable to people who I'm in real relationship with in real life. Like,
Mhm.
that's the primary, when people, and when I get critiques, I turn to people I know in real life,
Yeah.
people who are not soft on me, people who knew me before the visibility, who are not like phased by that. And I'm like,
Mhm.
no, am I fucking up? Like, tell me the truth.
Yeah.
Here's the circumstance. Here's what folks said. Like, let me know, because I want to make sure that if there's a lesson to learn, I learn it.
Mhm.
And if there is a lesson to learn, I learn it, I apply it, I move forward. If it's something that feels really unrelated to me, I'm like, okay, this is someone else's something.
Mhm.
I try to set a boundary and make sure it doesn't, land on me too much emotionally, spiritually. Um, and I try to like live my values in that visible space,
Mm.
right? To be like, I don't want to shy away from saying what I believe to be true.
Mm.
I do, I do try hard not to be knee jerk about it. So like, a
Mm.
lot of times when something's popping off, like I used to be very like, I've got something to say the day of, the moment of, the instant of. Now
Mm.
I'm like, I hear what you're saying. Let me take a couple of days. Let me simmer it through. Let me do yoga a few times. Let me meditate a few times and see what I actually have to offer this. And if there's nothing new,
Mm.
I don't have anything original to say that's not just what the echo chamber has already contributed, then I don't weigh in,
Mm.
right? If someone has said it better than I think I could say it, I don't weigh in. I uplift that, or I repost it. I
Mm.
think there's practices like that that help
Mm.
me navigate the waters of this. And, I I also think there's a big difference. Like, I started off in the organizing work and facilitation work, which is like, you don't get famous being a facilitating organizer. No one does. That's not what happens. And even I used to look down on the word activist. I was like, oh,
Mm,
activists are like removed from the work. Like, they're over there and I'm at work. I'm facilitating real organizers on the ground. All the things. And I've had to finally just accept, like, I don't want to get caught up in the language of it all. I am trying to create change in the world.
mm,
Now I'm doing that primarily through my writing. I
mm,
didn't ask for this visibility, but I haven't stepped out of it either. I
right,
haven't gone into hiding. I haven't become a hermit. I'm not like, oh, people do that. I have not
right.
done it. Like, okay, if you're gonna look, I'm gonna produce, I'm gonna be prolific, I'm gonna do as much as I can with the light.
Mm,
And um, I think if there's anyone who's like, there are people who are like, I'm trying to be famous, I'm trying to get that visibility. And I would warn against that as much as it seems like a good thing.
mm,
I'm like, really hone in on getting great at your craft, whatever your craft is. Being famous is not in and of itself a craft.
mm,
And I think that we're living in an age where people have been gotten confused about that a little bit. But I
mm,
think that if you get great at what you're doing, and if that thing would serve the world best by being seen in the light
mm,
will come on to you, you
yeah.
know? And if you're great at what you're doing and it doesn't need that light in order to have that impact, it won't be there. Some of
Mm,
the most outstanding humans I know will never be visible humans because the
mm,
work that they were called to do was the very personal work of
mm,
mothering, where there's no Oscar for it, but they were the best at it, right? Or sitting in hospice care with people day after day, and there's no, you don't get an award for that. No, the
mm,
person who's dying is not saying they're so great at this, but
right.
that doesn't mean that work is not so important and so meaningful, and can teach us a lot about how do we live through a world of dying systems and rebirthing
Mm,
systems. Like, the wisdom is all around us. And um, I hope that this phase will pass, where
mm,
everyone's trying to be seen, and
mm,
will, pass into something where, like, yeah, there's just enough light for the
mm,
ideas. In my dream world, like, sometimes I'll hear people, or people will send me stuff and they're like, this person's using your ideas or using your words and they didn't credit you. Like, aren't you furious? Like, and I'm like, sometimes I feel a little way. I'm like, dang, that's my whole sentence or whatever. But most of the time I'm like, I think that's good.
yeah.
The river of ideas moved through me and it's moving beyond me.
Mm,
And I didn't create any of this stuff like brand new in my head. Like, it may have synapsed in there in a way that feels new to me, but Rumi was writing about all this stuff centuries ago.
mm,
Um, the Tao Te Ching was written centuries ago.
mm,
Um, I don't know, Chinua Achebe was writing about this stuff decades ago. Like, there's so many people who are like paying attention to emergence and the viscerality of being alive and pleasure and how we relate to each other. And I'm another voice in a huge river. And, you know, and you don't know also, I never know. Like, I'm always like, maybe the most visible period of my life is behind me. Maybe it's ahead of me.
mm,
Actually, we don't know any of that either.
mm,
I'm going to keep doing my work.
mm.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah,
see what that does.
that's really helpful. And for me, from the perspective of teaching and practicing yoga and
Yeah,
getting known for that, it's
yeah.
like I always have to come back to yoga ethics, and that's also for the students or practitioners around me, is like, it's come back to what are the ethics that we're trying to practice, and how can
Hmm.
we, share from that place and be in alignment with those ethics and with one another, in community. That's really helped me my whole journey through, because I can relate. I kind of related as an organizer, a teacher, 'cause I was teaching high school, and an artist, and amongst a number of people in LA that were like some of whom I think you might know, like Mark Anthony Johnson
I
and
love Mark Anthony
yeah, and
Johnson. My sweet,
Patrice.
sweet Patrice.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, like that whole crew, we were all just trying to figure things the fuck out. Like honestly, like we were like, these systems make no sense and they're terrible. What can we do? What can we create? And it was that community. I think it might have been both Patrice and Mark Anthony who said to me, like, Susanna, you're always bringing meditation, you're always bringing movement and yoga. Like, go deeper into that,
Yeah,
you know, and
that's right.
they saw the thing in me that I couldn't really see, probably
Yeah.
because of a lot of external and internalized depression. But that those folks, you know, community have kept me accountable too through the years and the decades now to like,
Yes.
are you still practicing the thing for the purpose that you went into it for? Or has it shifted? Or how has it shifted? And it doesn't mean it can't shift, but
Right.
what,
It's necessarily going to, right? I mean, like this is, you know, there was a period in my life where I was like, I'm going to be a facilitator forever. That's my calling. I'm clearly like, there's so many things I'm not good at, but that's something that I have no question about what I can contribute. And then the visibility actually shifted what I could do in a room because it's different if you walk into a room and everyone's like, oh, that's Adrienne Maree Brown, and Adrienne Maree Brown thinks this and that, or whatever. There's a preconceived notion that makes it harder for me to be part of the container that's holding the group. And
mm,
that's fine. It's an unexpected thing. And I'm sure there are still groups that I could facilitate, but the people that I most wanted to,
mm,
it no longer feels accessible in the same way. And
mm,
like letting the grief of that in,
mm,
that it's like, oh, that has shifted, that has changed. And there's things that I did that contributed to that shift, like
mm,
publishing a bunch of books, right? And I didn't really think like, I was like, I'm working with a small anarchist press. They had never had a New York Times bestseller. Like, I'm good. Like, I'm just gonna write my little books, put them out,
mm.
and times shift under you. Patrice could tell you that. It's like
Oh yeah.
we're part of a long stream of people who've been working for Black liberation, and then this moment happens, and it's like all eyes are on you. Millions of dollars are pouring in. What? I didn't prepare for this, So I do think that also being able to stay in your lane, being able to figure out like what is it that I can offer, and then continuously listening with some curiosity. Like my yoga practice has been so private to me. And so
Mm,
it's so exciting when you sent me this invitation, I'm like, oh, that's so exciting. It's actually such an important part of my life.
yeah.
And this Ayurvedic journey that I'm on right
Mm,
now is such an important part of my life. Like I just got tattoos dedicated to it around my knees because I'm like, I'm
mm,
really dedicating myself to
mm,
um, loving my body in a different way. And maybe it'll help someone to know that, right? To be like, oh, this person who writes these books, like part of how she gets there is
mm,
through her relationship to the ground, and her
mm,
relationship to her breath, and her relationship to her center. Um, Almost everyone I know who is experiencing life as a good life,
mm,
right? Like like it's like we look at it, we can see what's hard, and we're work on that or tending to it, but we
mm,
can feel the goodness of our life too. We can feel the goodness of our relationships, the goodness of the children that we're getting to all be a part of raising,
mm.
the goodness of caring for each other. I mean, coming through this quarantine pandemic phase has just been so clarifying for me about the goodness of the people I'm in relationship with and how much we've been willing to jump through hoops to be with each other or to be boundaried with each other and to keep each other safe.
Mm,
Like, I don't know, there's just something so tender about that. I'm like,
mm.
that's what I want to have around me is people who are like, yeah, I fucking care. I'm not apathetic about this experience. Like I care. It's touching me deeply, and I'm cultivating my goodness in
Mm.
life. And I think whatever visibility comes should be used, it's like, let's get the light onto those things. Let's get the light onto those things. And Um, I also have been, I don't know if this is connected to what you asked now, but it's just coming up. And
Mm,
so I'm going to trust it. I've also been really reflecting on how many of the ancestors that I claim in the lineage of my work are people who were willing to step into the light of their time,
mm,
and people who had embodiment practices or practices of pleasure, practices of really tuning into their own erotic aliveness. And
mm,
I think about Angela Davis, I think about, who's not an ancestor, and she's right here in the lineage of my work living, but she's someone who inspires me all the time. Angela and Fania Davis are like yogis,
yeah.
right? We love yoga. I think about Rosa Parks and like the fortification it takes to be able to be in movement the way that she was, and
Mm,
also knowing that she was a yogi on a vegan path, and people
mm,
don't know that. I think about Audre Lorde and her uses of the erotic as power and what
mm,
she understood from within about living a good life,
mm,
given your conditions. And I'm trying to gather up,
mm,
those stories as I figure out, like, I'm not living a life of performance for other people. I'm living a good life that
mm,
advances my soul path, advances the work
mm.
that I'm here to do. And I'm really doing it. I'm
Yes.
really doing it. And I keep having these moments where I'm like, okay, I feel deeply satisfied by this moment. I feel deeply satisfied by this hour. I feel deeply
Mm,
satisfied by this day. And I feel deeply satisfied by who I'm in community with. And
mm,
I didn't know that that was possible for a lot of my life. I was like, that's not attainable. I'm like, no, it is. It takes practice,
mm,
lots of practice. And I think that's, I mean, if anything is the takeaway from this conversation for me, it's just like your life is what you practice.
mm,
And that's what yoga, that's the gift of yoga, is like your body is what you practice. Your relationships are what you practice.
mm,
Work and your impact on the world will be a direct result of what you practice.
mm,
Like, that's all we're actually doing here.
mm.
And that's good news, because practice is something you can iterate, you can keep doing.
And always come
You
back to. Yeah.
always come back
And
to.
improve and grow. Yeah, I just want to like spiritually highlight or under everything you just said.
Highlight, boom.
And I also want to honor your time. And so is there anything that you would like, us, the community of yoga practitioners and wellness practitioners that I'm part of, to turn our light on that you're doing that we can uplift or send energy to?
Well, um, I'm making music that I think is, that I know, I mean, it's designed for use with meditation, use with ritual, use with yoga, use with getting deeper into your body. And I'm slowly releasing the songs of an album with the Binksons, Abigail and Sean Binkson. And Jessamine has been listening to them, and she's like, no, these are really good. They really help you get where you need to go. And they're like about being in relationship with our ancestors, about being in touch with your own divinity. And they're meant to be simple and repetitive and mantra style, and just kind of get in there. And so that feels like a really, big
Yeah.
new offer, in a place where I'm like, I don't know why, but I really want to do this, and or I do know why. It's like I actually benefit so deeply from the music that folks make. Like, Beautiful Chorus got me through the quarantine. Like, I was like, I am by myself, but I'm like, I am everything I want to be. And I'm like, okay, we're gonna be okay. Like,
Yeah.
and like, okay, like, we need more of those. And then I'm working on this musical ritual, which we are beginning to tour. So we did it in New York in like last December. We're doing it in Holland. It'll be in St. Louis early next year, and we're looking for other places to bring it.
Mm,
But the idea is, like, how do we do a ritual that helps us grieve together and turn towards the future together,
mm,
and do that through singing in circle and building a choir community.
mm,
So those are some of the things I'm working on right now. I'm also writing a few books but I'm always writing books. So just always be like, maybe she has a new book out. I probably
Right.
do.
Yeah. Look
So,
for your books.
mhm.
Oh, I love that. I can't wait to
Oh,
listen.
and then my memes. I'm really
Yeah.
trying to do like little spells through memes and like, yeah,
Wait, the
that.
spell part. Tell
So
me about the spell.
on my
Yeah.
Instagram, I do these carousels, these like meme roundups, but I'm trying to make little magical spells where like even when we're feeling distraught or funky or the energy is sad or whatever, it's like trying to take people on the arc of like, yes, we're here. And like, just let's remember how beautifully we can dance. Let's remember how funny we are. Let's remember to not take this too seriously. And so I mostly do them on the weekends, like 2 or 3 of these on a weekend. And
Mm.
um, it's become something quite enjoyable for me. I'm trying to make sure that the internet is not just a dumpster trash heap. And
Yeah.
so that feels like one of my big offerings. So if you follow me on Instagram, you'll get like little spells that some
Mm.
people say they're therapeutic. Some people say they're really, just a lot of people are like, this is the reason I stay on Instagram, which I don't know if that's a good thing, but I'm like, thank you, because I do put some energy into my spells. So,
Yes, I love the framing of this as a spell.
oh
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you for
Yeah.
spending this very joyful, very pleasurable hour with me, and just so much gratitude for you and for your work.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this, and I feel deeply honored to be invited into this conversation with you.
Yeah, thank
All right.
you.
I'll see